International e-commerce and e-business is really fascinating and represents some potentially great opportunities for even small businesses. A couple of statistics. This was a recent stats on internet users, and so as you would expect, with China and India and Asia having the biggest populations, both over 1 billion people, it's not surprising to see that they represent most of the internet users. Where are we? Okay, so Europe is next. Latin Caribbean, Africa. This is actually surprising. We are only 8.6%. Who knew, right? So it just shows you that there is some great opportunity in different international markets. This is also interesting. This was from last year, so pretty recent. A survey found that 57% of respondents in 24 countries and 6 continents had shopped from an overseas site in the last 6 months, with some country numbers well into the 70s. So again, great opportunities out there. And then just quickly, a couple of trends. Let's see. Worldwide B2C e-commerce will increase by 20%. Business to business has been significantly growing due to accelerated migration of manufacturers. We're in a global economy, so that makes sense that your suppliers and your customers are all over the world, so the whole B2B market also is explosive. All right, so more growth statistics. Let's see. E-commerce growth trends. You can see that, let's see. Well, some of these in the early days is when they were first starting out, so it makes sense that those were huge numbers. But see, we're here. So we're maturing a little bit, but look, China, Indonesia, India, they're all growing explosively. So then you probably have heard the term BRIC. It used to be. It's changed now, but BRIC was Brazil, Russia, India, BRIC, see, China, of course. And that kind of plays out because India, China, Brazil, it's kind of matured. Russia's also matured. But anyway, it's just good to keep your eye on what's happening in a global environment to see if it might be worthwhile to explore some global internet business, whether B2C or B2C or B2B. More statistics. Europe, growing love for online shopping just like us, so that might be appropriate. Mobile, of course. We actually were the laggards in the mobile market. Europe and Asia were way ahead of us in all things mobile. So we are just catching up. So 1.6 billion people use their mobile devices to shop online globally. By the end of this year, over 2 billion mobile phone or tablet users will make some form of mobile commerce transactions. So again, huge. Just keep an eye on that. China, already 65% of the population purchase online at least once a month and from mobile, so be aware of that. Let's see. People who monitor their e-commerce sites know that a generous amount of traffic hails from overseas. Customers in markets around the world visit and want to transact at American sites. And this is interesting. American sites do have really great credibility, and a lot of people want American products. So, it's possible that you might be able to take advantage of that. I'm thinking of, possibly that alpaca client. Okay, let's see. Okay, so here's, in finding it, that's the big thing. How do you find when you're promoting your sites? Google made changes to its search algorithm in an effort to boost rankings of mobile-friendly pages. So we keep coming back to that mobile presence. Okay, about 60% of online Russians use search engine Yandex, and then China's is Baidu. So somehow or other, you got to do some research and see if you want to enter those markets. You have to get into their equivalent of Google. Probably register with them. Let's see. Social networks and smartphone have revolutionized online shopping in emerging markets. So again, you got to get into their social networks, and WeChat, QQ, and Sina. Not well, we saw in the social media chapter 6 that they do some countries around the world still do use Facebook and Twitter and so on, but recognize that other countries have their own popular social media sites, and if you're really serious, you want to research that, do your due diligence, and get onto those as well. So, global social surge. All right, got it. Okay. Let's see, localized websites. We're going to get into, think global, act local. That's kind of the slogan that most companies adopt. In other words, people want to see their own image and things. So if you're going to go global, or actually even they talk here, even at home, if you're going to target, cultural sub-segments in this country, you also need to adapt your marketing and web strategies for those sub-segments. So 17% of our population are Hispanic, and if you want to target the Hispanic market, you need to localize your web presence and social media presence for that particular target market. Okay. All right. Let's see. Same thing. We're going to get into this, but basically the idea is that if you're targeting, let's say, Brazil, you don't want to just translate your normal American site. You need to really localize the site for idioms and colors and images, and make it feel very local so people can see themselves in the website. Okay. So there's three major issues to consider when you're thinking about going global: trust in culture, language, and infrastructure. Let me get out of this for a second. So let's start with some statistics here. Back to here. All right. So this is the first quarter of 2017, pretty recent. We just saw this one. Okay, let me keep going here. Oops. A few more statistics with lots of pop-up ads, which are so annoying. All right, just very quickly. Let's see. Mobile social users increasing 7%. Unique mobile users, social media users. Okay, this all just validates what we were just talking about. Internet traffic. Okay, we saw that. This is just a map. Let's see. Website map. So, more than 1 billion websites on the internet. They don't really show really relative frequency, or it's hard to show, but the point is that, there's penetration across the globe here. Okay, mobile internet penetration. This one's an interesting one. So US has a 57% mobile penetration, but look at Sweden, 83%. Look how much, like I said a second ago, Europe and Asia are so far ahead of us in mobile. Okay, I'm not going to get into that too much, but let me go back to here. Okay, let's get into trust and culture. All right, so, one advantage that we as Americans have is that we do tend to have a little bit more credibility in our websites. So if people are going to an American website, we come with some embedded trust, as opposed to if you're going to a Russian website or a Nigerian website, and I apologize, I don't mean to slander any countries, but historically there's been a lot of scamming and so on from some of those countries, but you still need to build credibility and trust on your website, because this is a famous old New Yorker cartoon on the internet: nobody knows you're a dog. So you do need to build trust and credibility. So we've talked about this in our web design, but again, make sure your website is professional. Build credibility with verifications like the Better Business Bureau Online. Have good policies. Have good reviews. It's very much very similar to that. And let's get into language, and I'll jump back to some examples on the web. But so don't just translate. Here's the moral of the story. Don't just, everybody can go into Google Translator and just say, okay, translate now. That won't work, because there's all kinds of idioms. Now, this statistic from March of 2017 shows that English is still the predominant language, followed by Chinese, not surprising, and then Spanish. All this is not surprising. However, even though many people across the world do speak English, you can't assume that everyone does. And even if they do, if you're really targeting their market, they want to see it in their own language. Remember what I said a second ago about they want to see themselves in it. So if you're marketing to Brazil or Russia or China, you need to translate well. And there's different dialects. So one part of China has one dialect, another part has another dialect. So the words may be different, the idioms, the meanings. You have to really do your due diligence. And, you know, if you can't afford it, at least do the pages that you think will be most important to the target markets in those countries. There's many translation businesses. It does get expensive. I'm not sure how much costs these days, but it can be pretty expensive. All right, so before we get into culture, let me go back in here. Let's get at that. Okay, so Nike is a good example. They do a really good job with act global, think local. So for example, let's see, Asia Pacific. So if we went into, let's say, India. Okay, now this is interesting. India is all in English. And it looks pretty consistent. So let's go back. Let's go back in Asia. Let's see, Philippines. Oops, I guess they got rid of that one. But then this was interesting to me. There's one here. I don't. Maybe some of you recognize the flag. I apologize. I don't recognize the flag, but okay. So we don't know what that is. But in terms of translation, oh yeah, definitely translate. But notice that the web design is very minimalistic, very simplistic, and they do recommend starting with a minimalistic design and then customizing it for each country. Let me just do one more real quick. Let's do South America. Let's do Brazil. Okay, so they have translated, but where's all the... Oh, let's just do one just for fun. This is interesting. The pictures are not showing up for some odd reason. Oh wait, no, here we go. So we'd have to look a lot more, but it's interesting. In the other ones, the colors were very different, and the layout was very different, and so on. So anyway, you got the point. You really need to customize. Okay, we already saw this one. English, okay. Okay, so really, invest in the language. Hire locals or hire a translation service or whatever. Okay, so let's get into cultural differences. Don't make assumptions about culture, but let's see if this one will come up. This is a funny commercial about a European. Was just funny. We wouldn't see that commercial here in the U.S. Very different cultural norms. Let me get out of this and go to a couple of other quick things about culture. Okay, so here's just a few things to again, do your homework before you venture into an international market. All right, let's see here. So we talked about translation. Make sure you really do a good job, idioms and so on. Here's one example. Payment methods and taxation. The way people wish to pay for their shopping greatly differs. In France, it's only debit cards. In Germany, it's more debit like culture. While in China, they tend to do cash on delivery. Tech savvy. Let's see. Technologies differ across territories, are influenced by factors. Okay, they don't really say much there. Let me go to this next one here. This is just a nice little overview. How to market your e-commerce with cultural sensitivity. So let's see. They talk about these classic blunders. You've probably all heard of them. When Pepsi went into China, Come Alive with the Pepsi generation was translated into Pepsi brings her dead ancestors back from the grave. We've all heard that one. Let's see. So that goes back to translation again. We've talked about that. Go deeper than translation. Adapting your message to appeal to the different markets without losing the real meaning and localization, which modifies your content to cultural nuances. Let's see. They don't really give any examples, but I think you know what we're talking about. Think beyond words. Okay. Oh, here we go. Colors and symbols. These are very classic examples, but in most of Western Europe and Americas, the color white is associated with purity and marriage, but in China, Japan, parts of Africa, it's more somber. It's the color of mourning. So white would mean death to them. Let's see. In Belgium, the theme is cosmopolitan. In Chile, it's more family friendly. So again, it's just understanding the culture. Okay, invest in expertise. Definitely embrace the culture. Okay. So, all right. Let me go back here. So the moral of the story is that you should really do your homework and hire locals and look at themes and icons and all that kind of stuff. Oh, this one's kind of funny. Nova means not go, so you don't want to call an automobile that it doesn't go. But this one's kind of funny. There was that classic thing that turns out they say it wasn't really true, but you know how if you have a jar of baby food and it's got peas on it, then you put a picture of peas on the cover. If it's got carrots, if you have a picture of carrots on the cover, that means the baby food jar has got carrots in it. Well, then the old story went that they put a picture of babies on the cover, and people translated that as there's mashed up babies in the jar. Okay, never mind. Anyway, you've all heard that. Shopping carts. Some countries don't use shopping carts the way we do, so they don't understand the icon. Don't use cows in India. Muslim countries offended by human arms or legs, and so on and so forth. Okay, we're talking about that. Okay, there's all kinds of examples. Let's see. We're talking about all that. Okay, so we looked at the Nike chart. Now let's look at, let me get out of this, and let's look at a couple of Nestle examples here. So here's the global Nestle site. And our stories, Nestle and society, brands, careers, and so on and so forth. Colors kind of, subdued. Social issues, tackling child labor, commitments, history, contact us. There's probably a chat bot. The brands, global brands. So that's the global site. Let's look at their Japanese site. Very interesting. Pictures are different. Obviously the language is different. It looks similar, it's just a different language, but the pictures, seeing yourself in the picture. Here's the brands. I'm sure. I'm trying to see if there was something different. There may be some, unique brands in Japan. Okay. And then here is Brazil. And notice the colors seem a little different. They're brighter. The brands are different. Obviously, the language is different. Even the layout on this one's a little bit different. I can't read it. It's Portuguese. But everything is very different. It's very adapted locally to the culture, the colors, the product, the content, and so on. So I think you're getting the point there. All right, let's keep moving on here. So again, do your homework, adapt to the local cultures, think global, act local. Okay, then the next major thing is government and culture. We live in an open society. Not all countries are. So you need to really, before you dive in, you need to really study the laws of the government, because that could be, it could keep you from going in there. You have to really understand what you're getting yourself into. So, for example, you've probably heard of China's Great Firewall, massive intelligence surveillance and content control. So you have to register. It's home to some of the most valuable internet companies like Alibaba and Tencent. but you kind of have to register with them, and you have to know you're going to be censored. So, there was a big controversy, I think, with Google pulling out of China because of that. Anyway, we've had some interesting discussion in the forum, so we'll see if you guys find anything new about that. Let's see here. Some of the Arab countries impose taxes on their citizens so people don't use it. You have to, they'll censor you as well. You're not allowed to show certain images and so on. Like that. Okay, in Morocco, Algeria, they don't have restrictions, but Middle East, like I think Saudi Arabia and some of those countries, have big restrictions on what you can show. Okay, we're talking about that. In France, that's the law. It has to be in French, so you need to know that. Let's see here. So let's see. Let's go back into here. So this is a website, HRW, and it's just interesting because they have articles about, let's see here, wait. Okay, so media block threatened in dispute with Qatar. It's sort of social issues, but they do have things about the internet. So just an interesting site here. Let's see. Well, anyway, I only saw that one for now, but it is an interesting site. Okay, let's jump into the final thing, infrastructure issues, and we assume that the world is like us, that we've got a robust infrastructure, even though we have major gaps in this country. But we also need to do our due diligence and look at the infrastructure in other countries. So let me go to here. This was an interesting article. The real way to get internet to the next 4 billion people. And they talk about how to get the internet to underserved countries, billionaires. Okay, so major problem is that it's expensive. It's expensive to lay cable to provide the infrastructure. Governments, companies that own the infrastructure don't want to lease bandwidth because they've got a monopoly. Let's see here. Nigeria. So some are being innovative and bringing wireless, so they're increasing the infrastructure. Underseas cables have brought a 20-fold increase to African continent. Okay, so things are happening, but and satellites, okay, so on and so forth. But the point is that you can't assume that there's going to be an easily accessible internet infrastructure. So if you're thinking about going into a country like one of the countries in Africa, then you should research it and make sure that people in your target market do have access. Plus, the whole economic situation. Do you have an economic base where people can afford to purchase on the internet? China, of course, is exploding in its middle class, so they're prime market. But can we assume that China has a robust infrastructure outside of the major cities? So again, it's just something to look at. And then here's one. This is just an interesting map. It's a global internet map. So obviously, this is the most. So we are pretty well covered. Mexico, 43%. Honduras, 17.8%. So, it's just kind of interesting to see which countries. So Brazil's got 51%. The number one country is Iceland. In user penetration, Bermuda. It's not really infrastructure, but it infers infrastructure because you need to have infrastructure to have the user. So Russia, Sweden, UK, all the Western countries. What's this here? Oh, it's Kazakhstan, 54. Anyway, just an interesting thing. So, at the risk of complete redundancy, you want to look at, is the technology infrastructure there? Some other things are laws you have to look at. Processing international shipments can be a pain. The good news is there's software being developed that kind of automates that for you. Each country has their own forms and procedures, so you have to, look at that and understand it. Let's see, exchange rates. There's again evolving software that can automate the exchange rate process, but you have to look at that. If your country's currency is really strong, will people in other countries be able to afford it if their exchange rate is very weak? So, yeah, that in a nutshell are some of the major issues to consider. And as always, I look forward to your thoughts in the discussion forums. Thank you.